My name is Emma Chen, and I never imagined I'd have to pull out legal documents to prove ownership of my own bedroom to my younger brother. The absolute shock on Tyler's face when I spread those inheritance papers across my desk, showing that our grandmother had specifically left me the converted attic space in her will, was something I'll never forget. But the look on his girlfriend Madison's face when she realized she'd been sleeping in a room that legally belonged to me for the past month was even more priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still can't believe it came to this. Having to call our family attorney at 8 in the morning because my own brother refused to believe that the room he'd moved into without permission wasn't his to take. The room I'd spent 3 years of my life designing, renovating, and turning into my personal sanctuary and art studio. The space that held not just my belongings, but my entire creative world, my business, and honestly, my sense of identity within our family home. Growing up in the Hawthorne District of Portland, Tyler and I had what most people would consider a pretty typical sibling relationship. We were close enough in age that we shared friends, fought over the remote control, and generally drove our parents crazy with our constant bickering. Our house, a beautiful 1920s craftsman that our grandparents had purchased in the 1960s, was spacious enough that we each had our own rooms on the second floor, connected by a shared bathroom that was the source of endless arguments about whose turn it was to clean. Our grandmother, Lily Chen, was the heart of our family. She'd immigrated from Taiwan in the 1950s with nothing but determination and a fierce belief in the power of education and hard work. She and my grandfather had saved every penny to buy the house on Southeast Hawthorne, back when the neighborhood was still rough around the edges, and property was affordable for a young immigrant couple starting their American dream. Grandma Lily was the one who taught me to draw, who showed me how colors could tell stories, and who encouraged my artistic ambitions when everyone else thought they were impractical. When I was 15, Grandma Lily made a decision that would change everything, though I didn't fully understand it at the time. She approached me one summer afternoon while I was sketching in the backyard, struggling with the poor lighting in my cramped second-floor bedroom that barely had space for my art supplies and the growing collection of canvases I was accumulating. "Emma," she said in her accented English, sitting down beside me on the old wooden bench she'd positioned under the cherry tree. "You're serious about this art, aren't you? Not just a phase like Tyler's drumming?" I remember laughing because Tyler had indeed gone through a brief but very loud drumming phase the previous year that had nearly driven the whole neighborhood to madness. "Yes, Grandma. I want to go to art school, maybe become a graphic designer, or work in advertising. I know it's not the most practical career, but..." She held up her hand to stop me. "Practical is important, but passion is what makes life worth living. Your grandfather and I, we built this house room by room, dream by dream. That attic space up there, it's been storage for too many years. What if we made it into something special for you?" The attic renovation project became our shared obsession for the next 2 years. Grandma Lily, despite being in her 70s, insisted on being involved in every decision. We hired contractors to add proper insulation, install skylights that would flood the space with natural light, and create a full bathroom. She had them put in a separate entrance through the back of the house, accessible by a charming wooden staircase that wrapped around the old oak tree in our backyard. "This way," she explained, "you can come and go as you please when you're older. Artists need independence, need to feel like they have their own space in the world." The finished room was absolutely magical. Slanted ceilings followed the roof line, creating cozy nooks perfect for reading or sketching. The skylights she'd insisted on installing made the space feel like it was floating among the treetops. Built-in shelving along one wall held my growing collection of art books and supplies, while a large easel stationed near the biggest skylight became my favorite spot to paint. The hardwood floors, original to the house but newly refinished, gleamed honey-colored in the natural light. But the most special feature was something Grandma Lily had the contractors install without telling anyone else in the family. Behind a section of the built-in bookshelf was a small hidden compartment, just large enough to hold important documents. "Every artist needs a place to keep their most precious things safe," she told me with a knowing smile as she showed me the hidden latch. I moved into the attic room during my junior year of high school, and it immediately became not just my bedroom, but my sanctuary. I spent hours up there, drawing, painting, and later, when I got serious about digital design, working on my computer late into the night. The separate entrance meant I could have friends over without disturbing the rest of the family, and, as I got older, it gave me the independence Grandma Lily had promised. Tyler, meanwhile, seemed perfectly content with his second-floor room. It was larger than my old room had been, with better access to the main house, and he'd turned it into the ultimate guy cave with gaming systems, sports memorabilia, and a sound system that he thankfully used more responsibly than during his drumming phase. We rarely crossed paths in our respective spaces, which probably helped maintain the peace between us as we navigated the typical challenges of teenage siblings sharing a house. During my senior year of high school, Grandma Lily's health began to decline. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia the year before, though she'd hidden it from most of the family with her characteristic stubborn pride. I was one of the few people who knew, partly because I spent so much time with her, and partly because she trusted me with the truth. One afternoon in early spring, she asked me to come sit with her in the living room. Her hands, which had always been steady and sure whether she was cooking, gardening, or helping me mix paint colors, trembled slightly as she held a manila envelope. "Emma, there are things I need to tell you while my mind is still clear," she began, her voice carrying a seriousness I rarely heard from her. "This house, this family, it's all built on love and sacrifice. Your grandfather and I, we always planned that it would stay in the family, help the next generation build." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their own dreams. She opened the envelope and pulled out several official-looking documents. "I've been working with a lawyer, updating my will. The house will go to your parents eventually, of course, but there are some specific provisions I wanted to make sure you understand." My hands shook a little as she handed me a document with legal language I could barely comprehend, but certain phrases stood out clearly. Attic conversion and associated renovations. Exclusive use and ownership. Emma Chen, granddaughter. "Grandma, I don't understand. What does this mean exactly?" Her eyes, still sharp despite her diagnosis, met mine directly. "It means that room, your room, the space we created together, it's yours. Not just to use, but actually yours. When I'm gone, no one can take it from you, no one can tell you what to do with it. It's your foundation, your place in this family that no one can question." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "But why? I mean, I love the room, but why make it so official?" Grandma Lily was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window toward the backyard where we'd spent so many afternoons planning the renovation. "Because I've seen what happens in families when things aren't clear, when people make assumptions about who deserves what. You have a gift, Emma. You need a space where that gift can grow without interference. This room, it's not just about having a place to sleep. It's about having a place where you can become who you're meant to be." She made me promise to keep the documents safe, in the hidden compartment she'd had installed. "Your parents know about this provision, but they don't need to think about it now. This is just between us. Insurance for your future." Grandma Lily passed away 6 months later, just a few weeks before I started my freshman year at Portland State University, where I was majoring in graphic design. The grief was overwhelming, but having my room, our room, as a constant reminder of her love and belief in me provided comfort during those difficult months. College was an exciting time for me. I was finally studying something I was passionate about, surrounded by other creative people who understood my obsession with typography, color theory, and the intersection of art and technology. My professors were impressed with my portfolio, which I'd built largely from work created in my attic studio, and I quickly became involved in student design organizations and freelance projects. The separate entrance to my room proved invaluable during college. I could come and go without disturbing my parents, host study groups with classmates, and work on client projects late into the night without worrying about noise. The space had evolved to accommodate my growing sophistication as a designer. I had invested in professional lighting, a high-end computer setup, and storage systems for the increasing number of projects I was taking on. Tyler, meanwhile, had chosen to attend Oregon State University, about an hour and a half south in Corvallis. He was studying marketing and seemed to be enjoying the full college experience of dorm life, fraternity parties, and football games. During breaks, he'd come home and resume residence in his old room, but those visits became less frequent as he got more involved in campus life and started dating seriously. After graduation, I made the decision to stay in Portland and continue living at home while I built my freelance design business. This wasn't an uncommon choice among my classmates, given the competitive nature of the creative industry and the high cost of living in Portland's increasingly popular neighborhoods. My parents were supportive, understanding that my setup at home actually gave me advantages many of my peers didn't have: a professional workspace, no rent to worry about, and the ability to take on projects without the pressure of immediately earning enough to cover all living expenses. The decision proved to be smart. Within 2 years of graduation, I had built a solid client base that included several local restaurants, a boutique marketing agency, and even a few national brands that had found me through my online portfolio. The attic room had been transformed into a professional design studio that rivals many agencies I'd visited. I had everything organized perfectly: a section for traditional art supplies, a high-tech computer workstation, a presentation area where I could meet with clients, and even a small seating area where I could take breaks or brainstorm. Tyler graduated a year after me and initially moved into an apartment in Southeast Portland with 2 college friends. He'd landed a decent entry-level position with a digital marketing company downtown, and for a while it seemed like we were both successfully launching our adult lives. He'd visit the family home regularly for Sunday dinners, and we'd catch up on our respective careers and dating lives. Our relationship had settled into a comfortable adult sibling dynamic, marked by mutual respect for each other's independence and choices. Everything changed when Tyler met Madison Brooks. Madison was everything Tyler had never dated before. Where his previous girlfriends had been down-to-earth college students who wore jeans and flannel shirts and were perfectly happy grabbing pizza and watching movies, Madison was polished, ambitious, and expensive. She worked as a social media coordinator for a high-end fashion boutique, drove a BMW that was clearly beyond her salary range, and had very specific ideas about lifestyle and status. Tyler was completely smitten from their first date. He'd call me after spending time with her, talking non-stop about her style, her career ambitions, her sophisticated taste in restaurants and entertainment. "She's different from anyone I've ever met," he'd tell me, with a tone of voice that suggested he thought this was entirely a good thing. I met Madison for the first time at Tyler's birthday dinner, which our parents hosted at the house. She arrived wearing a dress that probably cost more than I typically spent on clothes in 6 months, carrying a designer purse, and immediately began complimenting our parents on their charming vintage home, in a way that somehow managed to sound both appreciative and condescending. During dinner, she asked me about my work with genuine curiosity, though I noticed she seemed surprised that I was making a good living as a freelance designer. "I just think it's so brave of you to work from home," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I could never handle the lack of structure. I need the energy of an office environment to really thrive." The comment stung a little, though I tried not to let it show. There's a persistent misconception that working from home, especially in creative fields, somehow indicates a lack of seriousness or ambition. In reality, running a successful freelance business requires incredible self-discipline, business acumen, and the ability to constantly hustle for new clients while delivering excellent work for existing ones. After dinner, Madison asked for a tour of the house, and Tyler eagerly showed her around. When they reached the main staircase, she looked up toward the 3rd floor with obvious curiosity. "What's up there?" she asked. "That's Emma's room," Tyler explained. "It's this amazing converted attic space that our grandmother had renovated for her in high school." Madison's eyebrows rose with interest. "Really? Can we see it?" I felt a moment of hesitation. My room had always been my private sanctuary, and I rarely invited people up unless they were close friends or clients I was meeting with professionally. But this was Tyler's girlfriend, and I didn't want to seem unwelcoming. "Sure," I said, leading them up the narrow staircase. Madison's reaction to the space was immediate and intense. Her eyes widened as she took in the skylights, the natural light, the professional setup, the built-in storage, and the overall aesthetic I'd carefully cultivated over the years. "Oh my God, Tyler," she breathed, walking slowly around the room and examining everything. "This is incredible. It's like a Pinterest dream room. And you have your own entrance? This is basically a separate apartment." She spent nearly 20 minutes exploring every corner, asking questions about the renovation, the lighting, the storage solutions, and my work setup. I found myself feeling oddly defensive. though I couldn't quite articulate why. There was something about the way she was examining the space that felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation. "You're so lucky," she told me as we finally headed back downstairs. "I've been trying to convince Tyler that we need to find a place with more character. Maybe something with unique architectural features like this. Most apartments are so generic and boring." At the time, I thought it was just an offhand comment from someone who appreciated good design. I had no idea it was the beginning of a plan that would turn my sanctuary into a battleground. Over the following months, Madison became a constant presence in Tyler's life and, by extension, in our family's life. She would join us for Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and casual weekend gatherings. My parents seemed to like her well enough, though I noticed my mother occasionally exchanging glances with my father when Madison would make comments about their decorating choices or suggest improvements to the house. Madison had a way of offering advice that sounded helpful but carried an undertone of criticism. She'd compliment my mother's cooking while mentioning how she'd learned to make the same dish a bit differently at a cooking class. She'd praise the house's vintage charm while pointing out areas that, quote, could really benefit from updating. It was subtle enough that calling her out would have seemed petty, but persistent enough to be quietly irritating. Tyler, however, was completely oblivious to these nuances. He was so enamored with Madison that he interpreted every comment she made as evidence of her sophistication and helpfulness. When she suggested that the living room would look better with different furniture arrangements, he immediately started moving chairs and tables. When she mentioned that the kitchen could use more modern lighting, he began researching pendant lamps online. I found myself spending more time in my attic room during family gatherings, partly to work on client projects, but also to avoid the subtle tension that Madison's presence seemed to create. From my skylights, I could sometimes hear her voice carrying from the backyard or through the windows, always animated, always offering opinions about how things could be improved or done differently. The first real warning sign came during a family barbecue in late summer. Madison had been dating Tyler for about 6 months at this point, and their relationship seemed to be getting serious. She'd started leaving clothes at his apartment, they were talking about taking a vacation together, and Tyler had begun making comments about their future plans. During the barbecue, Madison spent a considerable amount of time talking to my parents about the neighborhood, asking about property values, the history of the house, and their long-term plans. At the time, it seemed like normal conversation from someone who was getting more involved with the family. My parents were happy to share stories about how the neighborhood had changed over the years, how Grandma Lily had been one of the early supporters of the local business district, and how much they loved living in an area that had retained its character while becoming more vibrant. "You're so fortunate to have such a unique property," Madison told my mother while helping clear plates from the outdoor table. "Houses with this much character and space are becoming so rare. And the location is perfect, walking distance to all the best restaurants and shops." My mother smiled, pleased by the compliment. "We've been very happy here." My mother-in-law had such good instincts about the neighborhood's potential when she and her husband bought the house. Madison's eyes lit up with interest. "Oh, Tyler's grandmother owned this house originally. That's such a wonderful family legacy. It must feel so special to have that generational connection to a place." "It really does," my mother agreed. "She was an amazing woman. She even had that beautiful room created for Emma upstairs. She said every artist needed a space where they could grow their talents." I noticed Madison's attention sharpen at the mention of my room, though she kept her expression casually interested. "That's so thoughtful of her. Tyler showed me the space a while back, and it's absolutely stunning. Emma is so lucky to have such a perfect setup for her work." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I caught Madison glancing up toward the third-floor windows several times throughout the rest of the evening. At the time, I attributed it to normal curiosity, but looking back, I realized she was studying the space with a more calculating eye. Tyler's lease at his shared apartment was set to expire in October, and he'd been stressing about whether to renew or find a new place. The rent in Portland had been climbing steadily, and his roommates were considering moving to a less expensive neighborhood farther from downtown. Tyler's job was going well, but not well enough to afford a nice one-bedroom apartment in a desirable area on his own. During one of our Sunday dinners in September, Tyler brought up his housing dilemma. I'm trying to figure out what to do about living arrangements, he said, picking at his roast chicken. The guys want to move to Gresham to save money, but that would add at least 40 minutes to my commute each way. What about finding a different shared situation closer to town? I suggested. Maybe through work connections or online postings? Tyler shrugged. I've been looking, but everything in my price range is either in sketchy areas or with people who seem like they'd be terrible roommates. Plus, Madison thinks I should be thinking bigger picture about where I want to live long term. My father looked up from his plate. What does that mean exactly? Well, Tyler said, glancing at Madison, who nodded encouragingly. We've been talking about taking the next step in our relationship. Maybe moving in together. My parents exchanged one of their subtle looks. My mother recovered first, smiling diplomatically. That's exciting, honey. Have you been looking at places together? Madison leaned forward, suddenly very engaged in the conversation. We've been doing some preliminary research, but the market is so challenging right now. Everything decent is either way over budget, or in areas that aren't safe for a woman walking alone at night. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully before continuing. Actually, we've been wondering if there might be a temporary solution that could help everyone. Tyler's been thinking about whether it might make sense for him to move back home for a while, just until we can save up enough for a really nice place together. The suggestion hung in the air for a moment. Tyler moving back home wasn't an unreasonable idea in itself. Plenty of young adults returned to live with their parents temporarily while they saved money or figured out their next steps. But something about the way Madison had framed it as a solution that would help everyone made me feel uneasy. I think that could work, my mother said slowly. Your room is still available, and it would give you a chance to save money and spend more time with family. Tyler looked relieved. Really? That would be amazing. I could pay you guys rent, help with groceries and utilities. And Madison could spend time here too, get to know the family better. Of course, my father agreed, though we'd want to establish some guidelines about overnight guests and household responsibilities. Madison smiled brightly. Absolutely, we completely understand. Tyler's told me how respectful Emma is about her independence up in her space, and we'd want to follow the same approach. The comment seemed innocent enough, but it was the first time Madison had specifically referenced my living arrangement in the context of Tyler potentially moving home. I felt a small flicker of territorial anxiety, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. Over the next few weeks, Tyler and Madison began the process of planning his move back home. They spent time measuring his old room, discussing furniture arrangements, and talking about how to make the space work well for two people when Madison stayed over. Tyler seemed excited about the temporary arrangement, viewing it as a smart financial decision that would help him get ahead professionally while strengthening his relationship with Madison. Madison, meanwhile, had become increasingly interested in the house's layout and history. She would ask my parents detailed questions about the renovation work that had been done over the years, the original architectural features, and their long-term plans for the property. She seemed particularly fascinated by the story of how Grandma Lily had transformed the attic into my room. It's such a clever use of space, she would say. And so private with that separate entrance. It's really like having a little apartment within the house. One evening in mid-October, while Tyler was at work and Madison was visiting with my parents, she asked if she could see my room again. I'm trying to get some ideas for how Tyler and I could maximize the space in his room, she explained. Your setup is so efficient and well organized. I was in the middle of working on a tight deadline for a restaurant client, but I didn't want to seem rude. I led her upstairs, planning to give her a quick tour and then get back to work. Madison's examination of the space was even more thorough than during her first visit. She asked detailed questions about the built-in storage, the electrical setup for my computer equipment, the heating and cooling systems, and the bathroom facilities. She spent a long time at the windows, looking out at the views of the neighborhood and commenting on how peaceful and private it felt. You know, she said, settling into the small seating area I'd created near one of the skylights, Tyler and I were talking about how challenging it's going to be sharing his old room. It's really designed for one person, and with both of our clothes and belongings, it's going to feel pretty cramped. I made a non-committal sound, focusing on shutting down my computer so I could politely end the visit and return to work later. Madison continued, her tone casual but persistent. We were wondering if there might be some kind of arrangement that could work better for everyone. I mean, you're up here all by yourself in this amazing space, and we're going to be squished into a much smaller room downstairs. The implication of her comment hit me like a cold splash of water. I turned to face her directly. What kind of arrangement are you thinking about? Madison's smile was practiced and persuasive. Well, nothing permanent or anything dramatic. But we thought maybe we could work out some kind of sharing situation. Like, you could keep using the space during the day for your work, and we could use it in the evenings and overnight. Or maybe we could alternate weeks, or work out some other schedule that gives everyone more room and privacy. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The audacity of the suggestion was breathtaking. She was essentially proposing that I give up my room, my workspace, my sanctuary, so that she and Tyler could be more comfortable during what was supposed to be his temporary stay at our parents' house. Madison, I said, trying to keep my voice level, this is my room. It's not a shared space. It's where I live and work. Madison's expression shifted slightly, showing a flicker of irritation before returning to her pleasant mask. Of course. I understand it's your room. I'm not suggesting we take it over or anything like that. I just thought there might be a way to make the situation work better for everyone involved. The situation works fine for me exactly as it is, I replied firmly. Tyler's old room is perfectly adequate for him, and if it's not big enough for two people's belongings, then maybe you should consider spending fewer nights here. The suggestion clearly wasn't what Madison wanted to hear. Her smile became more forced, and I could see her calculating her next approach. I guess I'm just surprised that you wouldn't want to help Tyler out when he's trying to get back on his feet financially, she said, her tone taking on a slightly wounded quality. Family helping family, you know? Especially when you have so much space up here that you're not even fully using. The comment revealed so much about Madison's mindset. She saw my room not as my personal space and professional workspace, but as excess square footage that I was selfishly hoarding while Tyler struggled. She had no understanding of what the room meant to me, the work I did there, or the significance of its history in my relationship with my grandmother. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, standing up to signal that the conversation was over. This room isn't available for sharing or alternating use. Tyler knew that when he decided to move back home temporarily. Madison stood as well, her friendly facade finally slipping enough to show her true feelings. Fine. I was just trying to find a solution that would make everyone happy. But I can see you're not interested in being flexible. As she headed toward the stairs, she paused and looked back at me. You know, Tyler mentioned that your grandmother left you this room specifically. That was really generous of her. I'm sure she would have wanted you to use that gift to help family when they needed it. The comment was like a punch to the gut. Madison was invoking my grandmother's memory to manipulate me into giving up the space that Grandma Lily had specifically wanted me to have. The irony was that Grandma Lily had left me the room precisely to prevent this kind of situation, to ensure I had a space that couldn't be taken from me or compromised by family pressure. After Madison left, I sat in my room feeling shaken and angry. The conversation had revealed that she and Tyler had been planning this approach, discussing my living situation and developing strategies to access my space. Tyler, who knew better than anyone how important this room was to me, had apparently been willing to go along with Madison's scheme to pressure me into sharing it. I called my best friend Jessica that evening and told her about the conversation. Jessica had known me since college and understood how much my room meant to my work and my sense of independence. She actually suggested you should alternate weeks in your own room? Jessica asked, incredulous. Like it's some kind of vacation rental that you should be sharing with your brother's girlfriend? That's exactly how she presented it, I confirmed. And she kept talking about how I have so much space and how family should help family. Jessica was quiet for a moment, then said something that crystallized my own feelings. Emma, this isn't about space or helping family. This is about power and control. She wants that room because it's the nicest space in the house, and she's testing whether she can manipulate you into giving it up. Her words rang true. Madison's interest in my room wasn't about Tyler's comfort or their relationship needs. It was about her desire to have the best of everything, and her belief that she could convince me to hand over something valuable because I should be flexible and helpful. Tyler moved back home the following weekend, and initially, things seemed to settle into a workable routine. He was respectful about noise levels, helped with household chores, and contributed to groceries and utilities as he'd promised. Madison spent 2 or 3 nights a week at the house, and while I found her presence somewhat intrusive, it wasn't unbearable. However, I began to notice small changes that suggested Madison was still focused on my room. She would find excuses to walk past the external staircase that led to my entrance, often when I was coming or going. She would comment to my parents about how quiet it was on the 3rd floor, how private, how perfect for someone who needed to focus on work. She would mention to Tyler, loudly enough for me to overhear, how cramped his room felt with both of their belongings. More concerning were the conversations I started overhearing between Tyler and Madison when they thought I wasn't around. Through the old house's thin walls and floors, sound carried more than people realized, especially late at night when the house was quiet. I still think Emma would be open to some kind of sharing arrangement if we approached it the right way, I heard Madison say one night in November. She just got defensive because I surprised her with the suggestion. Tyler's response was muffled, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I don't know, Mads. That room is really important to her. It's where she does all her work. But it's not like she's using it 24 hours a day, Madison countered. And we're only talking about a temporary situation until we can afford our own place. I bet your parents would support the idea if we explained how much more comfortable it would make everyone. The idea that Madison was planning to involve my parents in pressuring me to give up my room was deeply unsettling. She was clearly developing a strategy to isolate me and make me seem unreasonable for wanting to keep my own space. I realized that I needed to have a conversation with Tyler directly, to make it clear that my room was off limits, and to understand how much he was supporting Madison's campaign to access it. But every time I tried to bring up the subject, Tyler would deflect or change topics, claiming he was too busy with work or that Madison had been misunderstood. The situation came to a head in early December, during a family dinner where Madison once again brought up the space challenges she and Tyler were facing. This time, however, she was more strategic in her approach. I feel terrible about how cramped Tyler and I are in his room, she said to my parents, her voice carrying just the right note of selfless concern. I know it's not ideal for me to be staying over so much when the space is really designed for one person. My mother looked sympathetic. Are you thinking you should spend fewer nights here until you two find your own place? Madison shook her head. Actually, we've been talking about accelerating our timeline for moving in together officially. But the challenge is that we need to save more money first. And the only way to do that is for Tyler to continue living here for several more months. She paused, glancing around the table before continuing. We were wondering if there might be some creative solutions to make the space work better for everyone during this transition period. I felt my stomach clench, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. Tyler, who had been unusually quiet during dinner, finally spoke up. We've been thinking about whether Emma might be open to some kind of temporary arrangement with her room. Nothing permanent, just something that would give us all more space and privacy while I'm saving money. My parents looked confused. What kind of arrangement? My father asked. Madison leaned forward, her presentation clearly rehearsed. Well, Emma has that beautiful, spacious room with its own entrance, and she's up there mostly during the day working. We thought maybe we could work out a schedule where she continues to use it as her office during business hours, and Tyler and I could use it in the evenings and overnight. The audacity of the proposal, presented to my parents as if it were a reasonable family negotiation, left me momentarily speechless. My mother looked at me with concern. Emma, what do you think about this idea? I found my voice, trying to keep it calm despite my rising anger. I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my living situation. That room isn't just my office, it's my home. It's where I sleep, where I keep my belongings, where I have my entire life set up. It's not available for sharing. Madison's expression shifted to one of hurt surprise. I'm not suggesting we take over your home, Emma. I'm just trying to find a solution that could help everyone be more comfortable during a temporary situation. The solution is for Tyler to use his own room, the one he grew up in, which is what he agreed to when he decided to move back home, I replied firmly. Tyler finally entered the conversation, and his words hit me like a betrayal. Come on, Emma. You have to admit that you have way more space than you actually need. And it's not like we'd be there during the day when you're working. The fact that my own brother was supporting Madison's campaign to take over my room was devastating. Tyler knew the history of that space, knew what my grandmother had intended when she left it to me, knew how hard I'd worked to build my business there. Yet he was willing to treat it as excess square footage that I should be sharing out of family obligation. Tyler, I said, looking directly at him, that room was specifically left to me by Grandma Lily. She wanted me to have my own space where I could build my career and my independence. She didn't intend for it to become a temporary solution for other family members' housing challenges. Madison's eyes sharpened with interest. Wait, your grandmother left you the room specifically? Like, in her will? I realized I'd revealed more than I intended, but there was no taking it back now. Yes. She had very clear intentions about that space. Madison exchanged a look with Tyler that I couldn't quite interpret. That's so interesting. I had no idea there were specific provisions like that. Your parents never mentioned it. My parents looked as surprised as Madison. Emma, we knew your grandmother wanted you to have the room, but we didn't realize she'd made it official in legal documents, my mother said. The conversation had taken a turn I wasn't prepared for, and I realized I'd opened a door I might not be able to close again. Madison's curiosity about the legal aspects of my room ownership was clearly more than casual interest. I think this discussion has gone far enough, I said, standing up from the table. My room is not available for sharing, scheduling, or negotiating. If Tyler and Madison need more space, they should look into getting their own apartment sooner rather than later. As I headed upstairs, I heard Madison's voice behind me, pitched perfectly to sound reasonable and concerned. I really didn't mean to upset anyone. I was just trying to find a way to make this transition easier for everybody. But I'd heard the calculation in her tone, seen the way her eyes had lit up when I mentioned the legal documents. Madison wasn't giving up on her campaign to access my room. She was just changing her strategy. That night, I lay awake staring at the skylights above my bed, watching clouds drift across the stars and trying to process what had happened at dinner. The revelation about the legal documents had clearly shifted something in the family dynamic, and I could sense that Madison's interest in my room had intensified rather than diminished. I kept replaying Tyler's words in my mind, the casual way he'd dismissed my need for the space, as if my entire life and career could be condensed into daytime hours to accommodate his relationship convenience. The next morning, I woke to find Tyler waiting for me in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and looking uncharacteristically serious. My parents had already left for work, and the house felt unusually quiet without the typical morning bustle of everyone getting ready for their day. Emma, we need to talk, he said without his usual morning pleasantries. I poured myself coffee, noting the formal tone in his voice. About what happened last night? Tyler nodded, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from childhood whenever he was struggling with something difficult. I think I handled that conversation badly. Madison was really upset after you left, and Mom and Dad seemed confused about the whole situation. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals growing up, where Grandma Lily had taught us both to fold dumplings, where our family had celebrated birthdays and holidays for decades. The familiarity of the setting made Tyler's next words even more jarring. The thing is, Emma, I really don't understand why you're being so inflexible about this. Madison wasn't asking you to move out or give up your room permanently. She was just suggesting a temporary sharing arrangement that could help everyone be more comfortable. I stared at my brother, searching his face for any sign that he understood how unreasonable his request was. Tyler, would you be comfortable sharing your bedroom with me and my hypothetical boyfriend? Having us sleep in your bed, use your bathroom, go through your belongings? Tyler shifted uncomfortably. That's different. My room is just a regular bedroom. Your room is huge, it has its own entrance, it's practically like a separate apartment. It's my home, Tyler. It's where I live and work. The size doesn't make it any less personal or private. Tyler was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of frustration and something that looked almost like resentment. You know what I think this is really about? I think you're jealous that I'm in a serious relationship and you're not." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me? Come on, Emma. You're 26 years old, still living at home, spending all your time alone in that room. When was the last time you even went on a date? Madison thinks you might be threatened by our relationship because it highlights how isolated you've become." I felt my face flush with anger and hurt. The idea that Madison had been analyzing my personal life and sharing her conclusions with Tyler was infuriating. But even worse was the realization that Tyler had accepted her assessment without question. "Madison thinks?" I repeated. "Madison, who's known me for 6 months, has opinions about my life choices and relationship status, and you're taking her word over your own sister's?" Tyler had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but he pressed on. "I'm just saying, maybe this is an opportunity for you to get out more, be more social. If you weren't spending every evening holed up in that room, you might actually meet someone." I stood up, my hands shaking with emotion. "Tyler, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. My room is not available for sharing, scheduling, or negotiating. I don't care what Madison wants. I don't care how cramped you feel in your old room. And I definitely don't care about her amateur psychological analysis of my life. If you're unhappy with your living situation, you're free to find somewhere else to live." Tyler's expression hardened. "Fine. But don't expect me to be sympathetic when Mom and Dad start asking questions about why you're being so selfish, about a space that's way too big for one person anyway." As he left the kitchen, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. Tyler had chosen Madison's perspective over mine, had accepted her characterization of me as selfish and isolated, rather than defending my right to my own space. The brother who had once been my closest ally had become a stranger, willing to pressure me into sacrificing my comfort for his girlfriend's desires. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house became increasingly tense. Madison continued to spend several nights a week there, and I began to notice that she was studying my routines, observing when I came and went, taking note of my work schedule. She would make casual comments about how early I got up, how late I worked, how quiet the third floor was in the evenings. More disturbing were the conversations I overheard between Madison and my parents. She had begun positioning herself as the reasonable party in the room dispute, expressing concern about family harmony, and wondering aloud whether there might be some compromise that could make everyone happy. "I just feel terrible that Tyler and I are causing tension," she told my mother one afternoon while I was working upstairs but could hear voices drifting up from the kitchen. "The last thing I want is to disrupt the family dynamic or make Emma feel pressured." "Oh, honey, you're not causing any problems," my mother assured her. "Emma's just very particular about her space. She's always been independent." Madison's voice carried a note of practiced concern. "I worry that she might be feeling left out, or resentful about Tyler and me getting serious. It must be hard watching your younger brother move forward in his relationship, while she's still figuring things out." I was amazed by Madison's ability to reframe the situation. Instead of acknowledging that she was the one making unreasonable demands on my space, she was casting herself as a concerned family member worried about my emotional well-being. She was painting my refusal to share my room as a symptom of personal issues rather than a reasonable boundary. The most insidious part of Madison's campaign was how she began to involve my parents in questioning my living arrangement. She would ask innocent-sounding questions about the house's history, about Grandma Lily's intentions, about whether my parents had ever considered alternative uses for the third-floor space. "It's such a beautiful room," she said during one Sunday dinner. "Your mother-in-law had such wonderful taste in the renovation. I bet it could work beautifully as a guest suite or even a rental space for extra income." My father looked thoughtful. "We never really considered renting it out. It's always been Emma's room." Madison nodded sympathetically. "Of course, and Emma's work is so important. I just wonder if there might be creative ways to use such a gorgeous space that could benefit the whole family." I watched this conversation with growing alarm, recognizing that Madison was planting seeds of doubt about my exclusive use of the room. She was subtly suggesting that my parents might be missing out on financial opportunities by allowing me to monopolize such valuable square footage. The situation escalated further when Madison began researching the legal aspects of my room ownership. I discovered this when she casually mentioned during dinner that she'd been curious about inheritance law and had looked up some information about property bequests. "It's so interesting how estates work," she said, directing her comments toward my parents. "I had no idea that specific parts of a house could be left to individual family members rather than just leaving the whole property to the heirs." My mother looked confused. "What do you mean?" Madison glanced at me with what appeared to be innocent curiosity. "Well, Emma mentioned that her grandmother left her the attic room specifically. I was just wondering how that works legally when the rest of the family still owns the main house." I felt my stomach drop as I realized Madison was fishing for information about the exact nature of my inheritance. She was trying to understand whether my claim to the room was legally enforceable or just a family understanding that could be challenged. My father frowned. "Emma, is that accurate? Did your grandmother make specific provisions about your room in her will?" I found myself in an impossible position. I could either lie to my parents or reveal information that Madison was clearly planning to use against me. "Grandma Lily wanted to make sure I had a secure place to live and work," I said carefully. "She knew how important the room was to my career." Madison leaned forward with apparent interest. "But is it actually legally yours? Or is it more of a family agreement?" "I'm just curious about how these things work." The directness of her question forced me to make a choice. "It's legally mine," I admitted. Grandma Lily included specific provisions in her will. The reaction around the table was immediate and complex. My parents looked surprised and slightly hurt that they hadn't been fully informed about the legal details. Tyler appeared confused and somewhat resentful. Madison's expression was unreadable, but I caught a flash of something calculating in her eyes. "Well, that certainly changes things," my father said slowly. "I wish your grandmother had discussed this more thoroughly with us at the time." Madison jumped into the awkward silence. "It's actually kind of wonderful that she was so thoughtful about Emma's future, though I imagine it must create some interesting dynamics for the family, having different ownership situations within the same house." Her comment was perfectly calibrated to sound supportive while highlighting the potential complications of my legal ownership. She was making my parents aware that my room wasn't just family property that could be reassigned based on need, but actually belonged to me in a way that might limit their authority over their own house. That night, I heard intense whispered conversations between Tyler and Madison in his room below mine. Though I couldn't make out specific words, the tone was urgent and planning-focused. I had the unsettling feeling that Madison was developing a new strategy based on the information she'd extracted about my legal ownership. My suspicions were confirmed a few days later when Tyler approached me with what he presented as a business proposition. He found me in my room during a break between client calls, and his demeanor was more formal than our usual sibling interactions. "Emma, I've been thinking about our conversation last week, and I want to apologize for some of the things I said. I was frustrated, and I took it out on you unfairly." I looked up from my computer, surprised by the conciliatory tone. "Okay, thank you for saying that." Tyler sat down in the chair across from my desk, his posture suggesting he had something important to discuss. "The thing is, I've been talking to Madison about the whole room situation, and we came up with an idea that might actually benefit you financially." I felt my guard go up immediately. "What kind of idea?" Tyler's enthusiasm seemed genuine as he outlined his proposal. "Well, we know that your room is legally yours, which means you could theoretically rent it out if you wanted to. We were thinking, what if we paid you market rate rent to use the space a few nights a week? You'd be making money from your investment, and we'd have the extra space we need." The proposal was cleverly constructed to sound like a business opportunity rather than a personal favor. Tyler was offering to treat my room like a rental property, which acknowledged my ownership while giving him and Madison regular access to the space. "How many nights a week are we talking about?" I asked, though I had no intention of agreeing to any arrangement. "Maybe 3 or 4 nights," Tyler said. "We'd be completely respectful of your belongings and your work setup. Think of it like an Airbnb situation, where you're renting out space you're not using anyway." The comparison to Airbnb revealed Tyler's fundamental misunderstanding of my objection to sharing the room. Airbnb hosts rent out spaces to strangers for short periods when they're not using them. My room wasn't a vacant property I was looking to monetize. It was my home, filled with my personal belongings, my work materials, and my private life. "Tyler, I appreciate that you're trying to find a compromise, but I'm not interested in renting out my room, even to family members. This is where I live." Tyler's expression shifted from hopeful to frustrated. Emma, be realistic. You're one person in a huge room with its own entrance and bathroom. You could easily accommodate a sharing arrangement without any real inconvenience. The inconvenience isn't the point, I explained, trying to remain patient. This is my personal space. I don't want to share my bedroom and bathroom with you and your girlfriend, regardless of whether you pay me for the privilege. Tyler stood up, his conciliatory mood evaporating. Fine, but I think you're making a mistake. Madison and I are trying to be fair and respectful about this, but if you're going to be completely inflexible, maybe we need to explore other options. The threat in his words was thinly veiled. Tyler was suggesting that if I didn't cooperate with their reasonable requests, they might pursue more aggressive alternatives. The implication was clear. They weren't planning to give up on accessing my room just because I'd said no. After Tyler left, I realized that Madison's influence on him had become total. The brother who had grown up respecting my independence and supporting my goals had been convinced that I was being selfish and unreasonable. Madison had successfully reframed my desire for privacy as a character flaw that needed to be overcome through family pressure. I decided it was time to consult with someone who could give me objective advice about the situation. I called Mark Rodriguez, the family attorney who had helped execute Grandma Lily's will. Mark had known our family for years and understood the history behind my room inheritance. Emma, it's good to hear from you, Mark said when I reached him at his office. How are things going with your design business? The business is going well, thanks. But I'm calling because I have some questions about the inheritance provisions for my room. There's been some family pressure about sharing the space, and I want to make sure I understand my legal rights. Mark's tone became more serious. What kind of pressure are we talking about? I explained the situation with Tyler and Madison, their various attempts to get me to share the room, and their latest proposal to pay rent for partial access. Mark listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific conversations and demands. Emma, I want to be very clear about something, Mark said when I finished. The provisions your grandmother made in her will are legally binding. That room, including the renovations and the separate entrance, belongs to you outright. No one can force you to share it, rent it, or give up access to it. The confirmation was reassuring, but Mark's next words were more concerning. However, I'm worried about the escalating nature of these requests. When family members start talking about exploring other options after being told no, it can sometimes lead to more serious conflicts. Have you considered having a formal conversation with your parents about the legal situation? I hadn't wanted to involve my parents more deeply in the dispute, but Mark's suggestion made sense. If Tyler and Madison were planning to escalate their campaign, it would be better for my parents to understand the full legal context before they were pressured into taking sides. That weekend, I asked my parents if we could have a private conversation about the room situation. We sat in the living room where I'd spent countless childhood hours reading, watching movies, and talking through problems with them. The familiar setting made the formality of our conversation feel strange and sad. I wanted to clarify some things about Grandma Lily's will and my room, I began. There seems to be some confusion about the legal aspects of the inheritance. My mother looked concerned. Emma, we've always understood that your grandmother wanted you to have that space. We never thought there was any question about it. I pulled out copies of the relevant will documents that Mark had provided me. I know you both supported Grandma Lily's decision, but I don't think you were aware of exactly how she structured the bequest. As my parents read through the legal language, I watched their expressions change from confusion to surprise to something that looked like concern. The documents made it clear that my ownership of the room was absolute and couldn't be overridden by family consensus or household management decisions. My father looked up from the papers. Emma, this is much more formal than we realized. Your grandmother essentially carved out a piece of our house and gave it to you permanently. The way he phrased it made my inheritance sound like a hostile takeover rather than a generous gift, and I felt the need to defend Grandma Lily's intentions. She wanted to make sure I had security and independence, I explained. She knew how important it was for me to have a space where I could build my career without worrying about being displaced by family changes or financial pressures. My mother nodded slowly. That makes sense, given what she'd observed in other families about children having to compete for resources. But it does create an unusual situation in terms of household dynamics. I could see that my parents were beginning to understand the complexity of having a legally independent space within their home. The arrangement that had worked smoothly for years, when I was the only one living there, was becoming more complicated now that Tyler and Madison were pushing for access. I wanted you both to understand the situation clearly because Tyler and Madison have been suggesting that I'm being unreasonable about sharing the room, I continued. But this isn't about me being inflexible or selfish. It's about respecting Grandma Lily's wishes and maintaining the boundaries she legally established. My father was quiet for a long moment, reading through the documents again. Emma, we support your right to the room, and we understand why your grandmother structured things this way. But I have to ask, is there absolutely no arrangement that could work for everyone during Tyler's temporary stay here? The question revealed that even my parents, despite understanding the legal situation, were still hoping for some kind of compromise that would satisfy Tyler and Madison's demands. The pressure for me to be the accommodating family member was so strong that even clear legal boundaries weren't seen as definitive. Dad, would you be comfortable with strangers sleeping in your bedroom several nights a week, even if they paid you rent? I asked. Because that's essentially what Tyler and Madison are asking me to do. My mother looked troubled. When you put it that way, it does seem like an unreasonable request. I think we've been so focused on trying to help Tyler save money that we haven't fully considered what we were asking of you. The conversation ended with my parents promising to support my position and to make it clear to Tyler and Madison that the room-sharing proposals needed to stop. I felt relieved to have their backing, but I also sensed that the conflict was far from over. Madison was too invested in accessing my room to give up easily, and Tyler was too influenced by her to accept defeat gracefully. The revelation about the legal documents had only provided them with more information to work with, not a reason to abandon their campaign. I was right to be concerned. Within days of my conversation with my parents, Madison had pivoted to a new strategy that would prove to be far more aggressive and manipulative than anything she'd tried before. Madison's new strategy became apparent the following Tuesday morning, when I woke to the sound of voices outside my window. Looking down through the skylights, I could see Madison standing in our backyard with a man I didn't recognize, both of them pointing up at my room and taking notes. The man was wearing a suit and carrying a clipboard, and their conversation appeared to be highly focused on the external staircase and entrance to my space. I quickly threw on clothes and hurried downstairs, my heart racing with apprehension about what Madison might be planning. As I approached the back door, I could hear fragments of their conversation through the glass. The separate entrance definitely makes it a distinct living unit, the man was saying. And with its own bathroom facilities, it would likely qualify for separate rental classification under city housing codes. Madison spotted me through the door and waved with false cheerfulness. Oh, Emma, perfect timing. I was just getting some information about the property for Tyler. I stepped outside, immediately feeling defensive about the stranger's presence and his obvious assessment of my living space. Information about what exactly? The man introduced himself as Derek Walsh, a property management consultant who specialized in maximizing rental income from residential properties. Ms. Brooks here was asking about the potential for converting unused or underutilized space into rental units. That's quite an impressive setup you have up there. The implication hit me like a cold wave. Madison was researching the possibility of forcing me to rent out my room by treating it as a separate rental unit within my parents' property. She was looking for ways to circumvent my refusal to share the space by finding legal or financial pressure points that could compel me to make it available. Mr. Walsh, I think there's been some confusion, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That space isn't available for rental. It's my personal residence. Derek looked between Madison and me with obvious confusion. Oh, I was under the impression that the family was exploring options for additional income from the property. Ms. Brooks mentioned that the space was currently underutilized. Madison's smile remained bright, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. There's been some family discussion about making the best use of all the space in the house. Emma is very attached to her current arrangement, but we're just exploring all the possibilities. The audacity of Madison's misrepresentation was breathtaking. She was presenting my refusal to rent out my room as emotional attachment rather than a reasonable exercise of my property rights. She was positioning herself as the rational family member exploring practical solutions while I was the obstacle to sensible financial planning. Mr. Walsh, I need to clarify something important, I said firmly. I am the legal owner of that space. It was specifically bequeathed to me in my grandmother's will. It's not family property available for rental decisions. Derek's expression shifted to surprise and slight embarrassment. Oh, I see. I wasn't aware of the ownership situation. Ms. Brooks, you didn't mention that the space belonged to someone else in the family. Madison's composure faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Well, it's a complex family situation. Emma inherited some rights to the space, but the family is still working out how that fits with the overall household management. Her carefully chosen words made my inheritance sound ambiguous and my ownership questionable, as if the legal documents were just one factor in ongoing family negotiations rather than definitive statements of my property rights. I think there's been a misunderstanding about why you were called here, I told Derek. The space isn't available for rental consultation because it belongs to me personally, not to the family collectively. Derek nodded, clearly uncomfortable with being in the middle of what was obviously a family dispute. I understand. In that case, any decisions about the space would need to come from you directly, Ms. Chen. I'll leave my card in case you're ever interested in exploring rental options in the future. After Derek left, Madison and I stood in the backyard in tense silence. The morning air was crisp with the promise of winter, and I could hear the distant sounds of neighborhood life beginning for the day. The normalcy of the setting contrasted sharply with the confrontation I knew was coming. Madison, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? I asked, no longer bothering to hide my anger. Madison's mask of friendly concern finally dropped completely, revealing the determined ambition underneath. I'm trying to find a solution that makes sense for everyone, Emma. You have this amazing space that you're barely using. Tyler and I are cramped in a tiny room, and your parents could be earning rental income from property that's just sitting there. I'm not barely using it. I live there. I work there. It's my home. Madison shook her head with apparent frustration. You're one person rattling around in a huge room that has its own entrance and bathroom. That's not efficient use of space, and it's not fair to the rest of the family. The entitlement in her statement was staggering. Madison had convinced herself that my personal living space should be redistributed based on her assessment of efficiency and fairness. She had appointed herself the judge of how much space I deserved and what constituted reasonable use of my own property. Madison, I want to be absolutely clear about something, I said, looking directly into her eyes. That room is mine. It's not available for sharing, renting, or discussion. No amount of pressure, manipulation, or outside consultation is going to change that fact. Madison's expression hardened with undisguised anger. Fine, but don't expect Tyler and me to just accept being treated like second-class family members while you hoard resources that could benefit everyone. The phrase hoard resources revealed everything about Madison's mindset. She saw my room not as my personal space but as a family asset that I was selfishly monopolizing. In her worldview, my desire for privacy and independence was a character flaw that justified her campaign to override my boundaries. I'm not hoarding anything, Madison. I'm living in my own home. If you're unhappy with Tyler's room, you're welcome to help him find a different living situation. Madison's laugh was sharp and humorless. Right. Because Tyler should have to move out of his family home just because his sister won't share a ridiculously oversized room. The conversation was going in circles, with Madison refusing to accept that my property rights trumped her convenience preferences. I realized that no amount of explanation or reasoning would change her position because she fundamentally didn't respect my ownership of the space. This conversation is over, I said, turning toward the house. Please don't bring any more property consultants to evaluate my home without my permission, Madison called after me as I walked away. Emma, you're making a huge mistake. This family has been supportive of your living situation for years, but that goodwill isn't unlimited. Don't assume you can just shut down reasonable discussions about sharing space. The threat was now explicit. Madison was suggesting that my family's support for my living arrangement was conditional and could be withdrawn if I didn't cooperate with her demands. She was positioning my refusal to share as unreasonable behavior that justified retaliation. That evening, Tyler confronted me about my interaction with Madison and Derek. He was angrier than I'd seen him since childhood, and his accusations revealed how completely Madison had poisoned his perspective on our family dynamics. "Emma, what the hell was that about this morning? Madison was trying to get information that could help our whole family financially, and you completely humiliated her in front of a professional consultant." I stared at my brother, amazed by his interpretation of the morning's events. "Tyler, Madison brought a stranger to our house to evaluate my personal living space without my knowledge or consent. How is that supposed to help our family?" Tyler's face flushed with frustration. "Because maybe, just maybe, there are better ways to use that space than having one person living alone in what's basically a luxury apartment. Did you ever think that your arrangement might not be sustainable long-term?" The suggestion that my living situation was unsustainable felt like a direct attack on the foundation of my independence. Tyler was implying that my current life was somehow temporary or inappropriate, that I should expect to be displaced eventually by family members with greater needs. "Tyler, Grandma Lily made that space sustainable by leaving it to me legally. It's not subject to family approval or resource reallocation." Tyler's expression shifted to something I'd never seen from him before, genuine resentment mixed with something that looked like hatred. "You know what, Emma? You've always been selfish, but this situation has shown me just how little you actually care about family." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Tyler was suggesting that my desire to keep my own room reflected a fundamental lack of love or loyalty to our family. Madison had successfully convinced him that my property rights were evidence of moral failure. "How is wanting to keep my own home selfish?" I asked, trying to understand the logic behind his attack. Tyler stood up, pacing the kitchen with agitated energy. "Because family is supposed to help each other. When someone you love needs support, you're supposed to make sacrifices. But you won't even consider temporarily sharing a space that's way too big for one person. Tyler, would you share your bedroom with me and my boyfriend several nights a week?" Tyler's response revealed the double standard he'd internalized. "That's completely different. My room is normal-sized, and I don't have my own separate entrance and bathroom. So because my space is nice, I should be required to share it?" Tyler nodded as if this was obvious. "Yes, you got this amazing gift from Grandma Lily, and instead of using it to help family when we need it, you're treating it like your personal fortress." The conversation made me realize that Tyler fundamentally misunderstood the nature of gifts and inheritance. He seemed to believe that receiving something valuable from a family member created an obligation to share that gift with other family members who wanted access to it. "Tyler, if someone gave you a car, would you be obligated to let other family members drive it whenever they wanted?" Tyler's analogy revealed his skewed thinking. "A car is different from a room. You can't live in multiple cars at the same time, but you could easily share living space." The fact that Tyler couldn't see the flaw in his reasoning showed how deeply Madison's perspective had infiltrated his thinking. He had accepted the premise that my personal space was inherently shareable in ways that other types of property were not. Our argument was interrupted by Madison entering the kitchen, her timing suspiciously perfect. She had clearly been listening to our conversation and had chosen her moment to intervene strategically. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said with false hesitation, "but I think there's something Emma should know about the legal situation with her room." I felt my stomach clench with apprehension. Madison's tone suggested she had discovered something that she believed would undermine my position. Madison sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a folder of papers. "I've been doing some research about inheritance law and property rights, especially in situations where someone inherits part of a family home." She spread out printed articles and legal documents, clearly having invested significant time and effort into understanding the legal framework around my inheritance. "The thing is, Emma, inheriting a room doesn't necessarily give you the same rights as owning a completely separate property. There are restrictions and obligations that come with partial ownership of a family residence." I felt my heart rate increase as Madison continued her presentation. She had obviously consulted with legal professionals or done extensive research to find potential vulnerabilities in my ownership claim. "For example," Madison continued, "if your parents need to sell the house for financial reasons, or if there are major repairs required that affect the whole property, your ownership of one room doesn't give you the right to block decisions that are necessary for the overall property." Tyler looked between Madison and me with obvious interest. What does that mean exactly? Madison's smile was triumphant. It means that Emma's legal ownership isn't as absolute as she's been claiming. Family property law is complex, and partial inheritance creates obligations as well as rights. I realized that Madison was attempting to create doubt about my legal position, hoping to pressure me into negotiating by suggesting that my ownership could be challenged or overridden under certain circumstances. Madison, I think you're misunderstanding the legal situation, I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. My inheritance is very clearly defined in my grandmother's will. Madison shook her head. Actually, I spoke with a lawyer yesterday. He explained that when someone inherits part of a family property, there are situations where the other family members can petition for modification of the arrangement if it's causing hardship or preventing reasonable use of the overall property. The suggestion that my family could legally challenge my inheritance was terrifying, especially coming from someone who had already demonstrated her willingness to manipulate legal and financial systems to get what she wanted. Tyler leaned forward with obvious interest. So Emma doesn't necessarily have the final say about how that space gets used? Madison nodded. Exactly. If the family can demonstrate that her exclusive use of such a large portion of the house is creating hardship for other family members, there might be legal remedies available. I realized that Madison was constructing a narrative where my refusal to share constituted abuse of my inheritance rights, creating grounds for family members to petition for relief. She was trying to turn my property ownership into a legal liability. I think you're both seriously misunderstanding inheritance law, I said, though Madison's research had shaken my confidence in my legal position. Madison's expression was almost pitying. Emma, I understand that you want to believe your ownership is absolute, but the reality is more complicated. Family property creates family obligations. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my parents, who sensed the tension immediately upon entering the kitchen. My mother looked at the papers spread across the table and the serious expressions on all our faces. What's going on here? She asked. Madison immediately shifted into her concerned family member persona. We were just discussing some of the legal complexities around Emma's room inheritance. I've been doing some research to better understand everyone's rights and obligations. My father picked up one of the printed articles, scanning the content with obvious interest. What kind of complexities? Madison launched into her presentation again, explaining her research about partial property inheritance and the potential for family members to seek modification of arrangements that caused hardship. She presented her findings as objective legal information rather than ammunition in her campaign to access my room. My parents listened with growing concern, clearly troubled by the suggestion that the family property arrangement might be more complicated than they'd realized. Emma, were you aware of these potential issues? My mother asked. I felt cornered and defensive, unsure how to respond to Madison's legal theories without seeming uninformed about my own inheritance. I think Madison might be overcomplicating the situation. Grandma Lily's will was very clear about her intentions. Madison's voice carried a note of patient correction. Intentions don't always translate directly into enforceable legal rights, especially in complex family property situations. The implication was that my understanding of my inheritance was naive and legally unsophisticated, while Madison's research represented a more realistic assessment of my actual rights. My father looked troubled. Maybe we should consult with Mark Rodriguez about this. If there are potential legal complications, we should understand them clearly. I felt a moment of relief, knowing that Mark would be able to clarify the actual legal situation and counter Madison's manipulative interpretation of inheritance law. Madison nodded enthusiastically. That's an excellent idea. I think everyone would benefit from having a clear professional assessment of the situation. Her willingness to involve our family attorney suggested either that she was confident in her legal research or that she was planning to use the consultation as another opportunity to pressure me into compromising. That night, I called Mark Rodriguez's office and scheduled an emergency consultation for the following day. I explained the situation briefly, mentioning that there were questions about potential challenges to my inheritance and requests for shared use of the space. Mark's response was immediate and reassuring. Emma, I drafted your grandmother's will personally. I can tell you with absolute certainty that your ownership of that room is legally unassailable. No family member can force you to share it, rent it, or modify your use of it. The confirmation was exactly what I needed to hear, but Mark's next comments were more concerning. However, I'm worried about the escalating pressure you're describing. When family members start researching ways to challenge inheritance documents, it usually indicates that they're considering more aggressive legal action. Mark's warning proved prophetic. The next morning, I woke to discover that Tyler and Madison had moved into my room overnight. I had been working late on a client project and had fallen asleep at my computer around 2 a.m. When I woke up at dawn, I found Tyler's belongings scattered throughout my space and Madison asleep in my bed. They had apparently used Tyler's key to the main house to access the internal staircase that connected to my room through a door I rarely locked since it was within the family home. The violation of my private space was so shocking that I stood frozen for several minutes, unable to process what I was seeing. My carefully organized art supplies had been moved to make room for Tyler's clothes. Madison's cosmetics were spread across my bathroom counter. They had rearranged my furniture to accommodate a second person's belongings. Most disturbing was the casual way they had claimed the space, as if their presence there was natural and expected. Madison woke up when she heard me moving around, and her reaction was not embarrassment or apology but defensive justification. "Good morning, Emma," she said, sitting up in my bed as if she belonged there. "Tyler and I decided that the legal situation is unclear enough that we should establish occupancy while we sort everything out." The calculated nature of their action was breathtaking. They had essentially staged a hostile takeover of my room, betting that I would be too shocked or conflict-averse to force them out immediately. Tyler emerged from my bathroom, fully dressed and clearly prepared for the confrontation he knew was coming. "Emma, before you get upset, let me explain our thinking." I found my voice, though it was shaking with rage. "Get out. Both of you, get out of my room right now." Tyler held up his hands in a gesture meant to appear reasonable. "Just hear us out. Madison's research showed that your legal ownership might not be as absolute as you thought. While we're waiting for the attorney consultation, it makes sense for us to share the space temporarily." The presumption behind Tyler's statement was staggering. They had decided that legal uncertainty gave them the right to occupy my room without permission, while forcing me to prove my ownership through professional consultation. "Tyler, this is breaking and entering. You don't have permission to be here." Madison laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "It's hardly breaking and entering when Tyler has lived in this house his whole life and has keys to every room." The legal technicality revealed Madison's strategic thinking. She had convinced Tyler that his general access to the family home overrode my specific ownership of the converted attic space. "The internal door between your room and the house has never been locked," Tyler added. "We didn't break anything or damage anything. We just decided to use space that's been sitting empty most nights." Their justification revealed the fundamental disrespect underlying their entire campaign. They viewed my room as empty during the hours when I wasn't physically present, as if my ownership only extended to the times when I was actively occupying the space. I realized that arguing with them was pointless. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and no amount of explanation would make them understand the violation they had committed. Instead, I called Mark Rodriguez's office, reaching his emergency line and explaining that I needed immediate legal assistance with a family property dispute that had escalated to unauthorized occupation of my space. Mark's response was swift and unambiguous. "Emma, you have the absolute right to remove anyone from your property, regardless of their relationship to you. If Tyler and Madison won't leave voluntarily, you have grounds to call the police for trespassing." The suggestion of involving law enforcement in a family dispute was painful, but I realized that Tyler and Madison had created a situation that was beyond normal family conflict resolution. I returned to my room to find Tyler and Madison making themselves breakfast, using the small kitchenette I had installed for client meetings and late-night work sessions. The domesticity of their behavior was surreal and infuriating. "I've spoken with my attorney," I announced. "You have 1 hour to remove all of your belongings and vacate my room, or I'll be calling the police to report trespassing." Madison's reaction was immediate and revealing. "You would really call the cops on your own brother? Over a room?" The way she framed the situation demonstrated her complete inability to understand my perspective. In Madison's mind, I was the aggressor for wanting to remove them from my space, while their unauthorized occupation was a reasonable response to a family disagreement. Tyler looked genuinely shocked. "Emma, come on! We're family! We can work this out without involving outsiders." The irony of Tyler's appeal to family loyalty was almost overwhelming. He was asking me to prioritize family relationships while simultaneously violating my most basic property rights and personal boundaries. "Tyler, you worked this out the moment you decided to move into my room without permission. You made it a legal issue, not a family issue." Madison stood up, her expression shifting to cold calculation. "Fine. But don't expect this to end here, Emma. If you want to escalate this to legal battles, you should be prepared for the consequences." The threat was unmistakable. Madison was suggesting that forcing them out of my room would trigger more serious legal challenges to my inheritance or my living situation. Over the next hour, Tyler and Madison slowly and resentfully gathered their belongings while I sat at my desk trying to work, though concentration was impossible. The atmosphere was thick with anger and unspoken recriminations. As they prepared to leave, Madison made one final attempt at manipulation. "Emma, I hope you realize that this decision is going to permanently damage your relationships with everyone in this family. Tyler's parents are going to see exactly what kind of person you really are." The suggestion that my parents would side with Madison and Tyler after they had violated my space was another indication of Madison's fundamental misunderstanding of family dynamics and property rights. Tyler's parting words were even more painful. "I never thought my own sister would choose a room over her family. But I guess I was wrong about who you really are." After they left, I sat in my violated space feeling emotionally drained and profoundly sad. The room that had been my sanctuary for years now felt contaminated by their presence and their disrespect. Every surface they had touched seemed to carry the residue of their entitlement and manipulation. But more devastating than the physical violation was the realization that my relationship with Tyler had been fundamentally damaged, perhaps beyond repair. Madison had successfully turned my brother against me by convincing him that my desire for privacy represented a rejection of family love and loyalty. The consultation with Mark Rodriguez that afternoon confirmed what I already knew. My legal rights were absolute, and Tyler and Madison's occupation of my room had been criminal trespassing. Mark offered to send a formal letter to both of them, making it clear that any future attempts to access my space without permission would result in immediate legal action. The resolution of the immediate crisis felt hollow because it had come at such a high cost to my family relationships. Madison's campaign to access my room had revealed fault lines in my family that I hadn't known existed, exposing resentments and entitlements that had been hidden beneath the surface of normal family interactions. Over the following weeks, Tyler and Madison found their own apartment, finally achieving the independence they claimed to want. Madison's interest in sharing my room had evaporated once it became clear that legal action would result from any further attempts at unauthorized access. But the damage to my family had been extensive. Tyler's attitude toward me remained cold and resentful, influenced by Madison's narrative that I had chosen material possessions over family relationships. My parents, while supportive of my legal rights, were saddened by the conflict and the permanent shift in family dynamics. The most painful aspect of the entire situation was the realization that Madison had never really wanted to share my room for practical reasons. Her campaign had been about power and control, about testing whether she could manipulate family relationships to override my boundaries and independence. Tyler's willingness to support her efforts revealed how thoroughly she had influenced his thinking, convincing him that my success and independence were somehow threats to his own well-being rather than sources of family pride. As I worked to restore my room to its previous state of sanctuary and productivity, I reflected on the lessons the experience had taught me about family, boundaries, and the price of independence. Grandma Lily's decision to leave me the room legally had proven to be prescient, protecting me from exactly the kind of family pressure that Madison had orchestrated. The hidden compartment behind my bookshelf, where Grandma Lily had told me to keep the ownership documents, had served its purpose perfectly. When family members had questioned my rights and threatened my security, those papers had provided unassailable proof of my legal position. But more importantly, the experience had taught me that family relationships built on manipulation and entitlement are not worth preserving at the cost of personal integrity and independence. Madison's campaign had forced me to choose between maintaining peace and maintaining my boundaries, and I was grateful that I had chosen correctly. The room that had once been a symbol of my grandmother's love and support for my dreams had become a symbol of my own strength and self-respect. Standing in my restored sanctuary, surrounded by my art and my work and my carefully chosen possessions, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the wisdom of an immigrant grandmother who had understood the importance of giving her granddaughter a space that no one could take away. Tyler and Madison's relationship didn't survive their move to independent living. Without the external pressure of the room conflict to unite them, the fundamental incompatibilities in their values and priorities became apparent. Madison's materialism and manipulation had been temporarily focused on accessing my space, but those traits inevitably turned toward other targets once that campaign failed. Tyler eventually reached out to me months later, offering an apology that was genuine but incomplete. He acknowledged that Madison had influenced his thinking, and that their occupation of my room had been wrong, but he never fully accepted responsibility for his role in the campaign, or demonstrated understanding of how deeply his betrayal had wounded me. I accepted his apology because he was still my brother, but our relationship remained fundamentally changed. The easy trust and mutual support that had characterized our childhood connection was gone, replaced by a more cautious dynamic based on clear boundaries and realistic expectations. My parents and I worked to rebuild the family harmony that Madison's presence had disrupted, but we all understood that some damage was permanent. The experience had revealed aspects of family dynamics that couldn't be unknown or ignored, changing our understanding of loyalty, obligation, and independence within family structures. In the end, the room that my grandmother had created as a space for my artistic and professional growth had become something even more valuable, a symbol of the importance of maintaining personal boundaries and the strength required to defend them against family pressure and manipulation. As I continued to build my design business from my attic sanctuary, surrounded by the skylights and built-in storage that Grandma Lily had envisioned, I carried with me the knowledge that true family support means respecting each other's independence and success, not demanding access to the fruits of that success for personal convenience. The documents hidden behind my bookshelf remained in their secret compartment, no longer needed for legal defense, but kept as a reminder of my grandmother's wisdom and foresight. She had understood something about family dynamics and the challenges of independence that had taken me years to fully appreciate. Madison had taught me that not everyone who claims to care about family actually understands what family love looks like. Real family support means celebrating each other's achievements and respecting each other's boundaries, not trying to redistribute resources based on personal desire or perceived fairness. Tyler had taught me that even the closest family relationships can be corrupted by outside influence and personal insecurity, and that maintaining those relationships sometimes requires accepting painful changes in their nature and depth. Most importantly, the entire experience had taught me that the independence and security my grandmother had tried to give me were not just physical spaces or legal documents, but states of mind that required constant protection and occasional defense. Standing in my room on a quiet Sunday morning, watching the light stream through the skylights onto the art supplies and computer equipment that represented my livelihood and my dreams, I felt the presence of my grandmother's love and wisdom surrounding me like a protective embrace. The room she had created for me had served its purpose perfectly, not just as a space for creative work, but as a foundation for the kind of independence that allows a person to remain true to themselves, even when family pressure demands compromise and sacrifice. I had learned to show Tyler and Madison the hidden ownership documents, but more importantly, I had learned to show myself the hidden strength and self-respect that my grandmother had believed I possessed. In defending my room, I had discovered my own voice and my own power, and those discoveries were worth more than any amount of family peace purchased through self-betrayal. The external staircase that wrapped around the old oak tree still creaked slightly when I climbed it each evening, returning to my sanctuary after a day of client meetings and creative challenges. But now that sound carried with it not just the comfort of coming home, but the satisfaction of having earned the right to be there through my own strength and determination. Grandma Lily had given me more than a room. She had given me the tools to build a life of independence and self-respect, and the wisdom to recognize that those gifts were worth defending against anyone who didn't understand their value. The morning after forcing Tyler and Madison out of my room, I woke to an eerie silence that felt both peaceful and unsettling. For the first time in months, my space was truly mine again, but the violation of their unauthorized occupation lingered like a bad taste. I spent hours that day methodically cleaning every surface they had touched, reorganizing my belongings, and trying to reclaim the sanctuary that had been so carelessly invaded. As I worked, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Tyler, each one more desperate and accusatory than the last. He claimed I was destroying our family over stubborn pride, and that Madison was devastated by my refusal to compromise. The messages revealed how completely he had internalized Madison's narrative that I was the unreasonable party in this conflict. But it was Madison's text messages that truly showed her character. Rather than accepting defeat gracefully, she had launched into a campaign of emotional manipulation that would have been impressive if it weren't so transparent. She alternated between fake apologies and veiled threats, claiming she had only wanted to help the family, while simultaneously suggesting that my actions would have serious consequences for my relationships with everyone. The most revealing message came that afternoon. "Emma, I hope you understand that forcing us out like criminals has shown everyone your true priorities. Tyler's parents are going to realize what kind of daughter they raised when they see how you treat family members who just needed a little help." The audacity of framing their trespassing as needing a little help, while casting my response as evidence of poor character, was classic Madison. She had an extraordinary ability to reframe every situation to position herself as the victim, regardless of her actual behavior. I decided it was time to end this conflict definitively. Madison's threats and Tyler's resentment made it clear that they weren't going to accept my boundaries without irrefutable proof of my legal position. The hidden compartment behind my bookshelf, which had seemed like such a charming feature when Grandma Lily first showed it to me, was about to serve its intended purpose. I carefully removed the books from the designated shelf section and triggered the hidden latch that revealed the small storage space behind. Inside, exactly where I had placed them years ago, were the documents that would settle this dispute once and for all. Grandma Lily's will, the property deed amendments, the architectural plans showing the room's legal status as separate property, and a letter she had written to me explaining her intentions in detail. Reading my grandmother's letter again after all these years brought tears to my eyes. Her faded handwriting carried messages that seemed prophetic given the current situation. "Emma, my dear granddaughter, I have seen too many families torn apart by arguments over property and inheritance. By making your ownership of this space absolutely clear in legal documents, I hope to prevent anyone from questioning your right to independence and security." She had continued, "There may come a time when family members try to pressure you into sharing or giving up this space. Remember that true family love respects boundaries and celebrates individual success. Anyone who tries to take from you what you have earned or inherited does not have your best interests at heart, regardless of their relationship to you." It was as if Grandma Lily had foreseen exactly the situation I was facing with Tyler and Madison. Her wisdom about family dynamics and the importance of legal protection had never been more relevant. I photographed all the documents carefully, creating digital copies that I sent to Mark Rodriguez for his review. His response came within an hour, confirming what I already knew but needed to hear officially. "Emma, these documents make your ownership absolutely unassailable. No family member, regardless of their relationship to you or their living situation, has any legal claim to access or use your space without your explicit permission." Mark's email continued with advice that proved crucial. "Given the escalating nature of this conflict, I recommend that you share these documents with your parents and brother immediately. Sometimes family disputes continue to fester because people don't understand the full legal reality of the situation. Clear documentation often ends arguments that emotional appeals cannot resolve." That evening, I asked my parents and Tyler to meet me in the living room for a family discussion. I didn't mention Madison in the invitation, though I suspected Tyler would bring her anyway. I was prepared for that possibility and actually hoped she would attend, as I wanted her to hear directly from the legal documents rather than through Tyler's potentially filtered interpretation. As expected, Tyler arrived with Madison in tow, both of them wearing expressions of wary hostility. They clearly expected another emotional confrontation about the room situation, and Madison had probably coached Tyler on arguments about family loyalty and shared resources. My parents looked tired and stressed, obviously hoping that this meeting would finally resolve the conflict that had been consuming our family for months. They sat on the couch together, presenting a united front but clearly unsure about what I was planning to reveal. I had arranged the documents on the coffee table, along with copies for everyone to examine. The formal presentation felt strange in our comfortable family living room, but the gravity of the situation demanded official documentation rather than emotional appeals. I asked everyone here tonight because there seems to be ongoing confusion about the legal status of my room and my rights regarding its use, I began, keeping my voice calm and professional. I want to share the actual legal documents so that everyone understands the situation clearly. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Emma, we don't need lawyers and legal documents to work out family issues. This is between us. Madison, however, leaned forward with obvious interest, her earlier research having made her curious about the specific legal framework of my inheritance. Actually, I think it would be helpful for everyone to understand the legal reality. That way there's no confusion about rights and obligations. Her response revealed that she still believed her research had uncovered vulnerabilities in my position that these documents would confirm. Madison was confident that a closer examination of the legal details would support her arguments about partial property inheritance and family obligations. I handed copies of the will provisions to everyone, watching their expressions as they read through the formal legal language. The documents were comprehensive and unambiguous, describing not just my ownership of the room, but the specific reasoning behind my grandmother's decision. My mother was the first to speak, her voice carrying surprise and something that sounded like hurt. Emma, I had no idea the legal provisions were this detailed. Your grandmother essentially carved out a permanent, independent piece of our house and gave it to you exclusively. The way my mother phrased it made my inheritance sound like a hostile act rather than a generous gift, and I realized that even my parents hadn't fully understood the implications of Grandma Lily's decision until now. My father was reading through the architectural plans that showed the room's legal classification as separate property. These documents establish your space as essentially a separate residence within our house. You have property rights that are completely independent of our family home ownership. Tyler's face had gone pale as he read through the will provisions. This says that Emma has exclusive and permanent use of the room, and that, quote, no other family member may claim access or usage rights under any circumstances. Grandma Lily actually anticipated this exact situation. Madison snatched the documents from Tyler's hands, scanning them with increasing agitation. Her confident expression was rapidly shifting to confusion and then anger, as she realized that her legal research had been completely wrong about my vulnerability to family challenges. This doesn't make sense, Madison said, her voice rising with frustration. How can someone inherit part of a house while the rest of the family owns the remainder? This creates impossible legal complications. Mark Rodriguez had anticipated this reaction and had provided me with explanations for the most common questions about partial property inheritance. Actually, this type of arrangement is more common than people realize, especially in families where there are specific spaces designed for particular family members' needs. Grandma Lily worked with experienced estate attorneys to ensure the legal structure was sound. I pulled out the letter my grandmother had written to me, reading aloud the sections that addressed family pressure and boundary violations. Emma, I want you to understand that this room is yours not just to use but to control completely. If anyone in the family tries to pressure you into sharing or giving up this space, they are not respecting my wishes or your rights. True family members support each other's independence and success, rather than trying to claim access to the fruits of that success. The words hit Tyler like a physical blow. His expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like shame, as he realized that his grandmother had specifically warned against the exact behavior he had been exhibiting. Madison, however, was not ready to concede defeat. Fine, so Emma legally owns the room. But that doesn't change the fact that her refusal to help family members when they need it shows a fundamental lack of generosity and family loyalty. My father's response surprised everyone, including me. His voice carried an authority I rarely heard him use with anyone outside our immediate family. Madison, I think you need to reconsider your position here. Emma's grandmother made these legal provisions specifically to protect her from the kind of pressure you've been applying. The fact that you're continuing to argue for access to someone else's property after seeing these documents is deeply concerning." The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, and Madison's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She clearly hadn't expected my parents to take such a definitive stance against her campaign. Tyler tried to defend Madison, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. "Dad, Madison was just trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. We weren't trying to take advantage of Emma." My mother's response was sad but firm. "Tyler, I understand that your living situation has been challenging, but the solution was never to pressure Emma into giving up her personal space. We should have encouraged you to find your own apartment sooner, rather than supporting attempts to share Emma's room." The admission that my parents recognized their role in enabling the pressure I'd been facing was both validating and painful. I realized that their desire to help Tyler had led them to minimize my rights and boundaries, creating space for Madison's manipulative campaign. Madison stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "Fine. I can see that Emma has turned everyone against me, with her legal documents and her victim narrative. But don't expect Tyler and me to just disappear quietly, while she continues to hoard resources that could benefit the whole family." The phrase, victim narrative, revealed Madison's complete inability to accept responsibility for her behavior. Even faced with irrefutable legal documentation of my property rights, she was still framing my desire to keep my own room as evidence of selfishness and manipulation. Tyler looked torn between supporting Madison and acknowledging the reality of the legal situation. "Madison, maybe we should just focus on finding our own place like we originally planned." Madison's response to Tyler's suggestion was telling. "Of course that's what Emma wants. For us to go away quietly so she can continue living in luxury while family members struggle with cramped quarters and high rent." The comment revealed that Madison's interest in my room had never been about temporary assistance or family harmony. She genuinely believed that my success and comfortable living situation were somehow unfair advantages that should be redistributed to benefit her and Tyler. My grandmother's letter had anticipated this exact mindset. Some people will try to make you feel guilty for having nice things or achieving independence. They will suggest that your success creates obligations to support others who are less fortunate. Remember that generosity should always be voluntary, and that anyone who tries to claim your resources as their right does not deserve access to them. I shared this passage with the room, watching Madison's expression shift to cold fury as she realized that even my deceased grandmother had seen through her manipulative tactics. "I think this conversation has gone far enough," I said, gathering up the documents. "These papers make it clear that my room is my property exclusively, and that any attempts to access it without my permission constitute trespassing. I hope everyone can respect those boundaries moving forward." Madison's parting shot was predictable but still painful. "Emma, I hope you're happy with your choice to prioritize property over people. When you're sitting alone in your perfect room, remember that you chose legal documents over family relationships." After Madison and Tyler left, my parents and I sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. The formal presentation of legal documents had resolved the immediate conflict, but it had also highlighted underlying family dynamics that were troubling and complex. My mother spoke first, her voice carrying regret and confusion. "Emma, I'm sorry that we didn't understand the full extent of your inheritance earlier. If we had known how comprehensive your grandmother's provisions were, we would never have supported Tyler's requests to share your space." My father nodded in agreement. "Your grandmother was obviously very thoughtful about protecting your independence. We should have respected that from the beginning instead of treating your room as excess family space that could be redistributed based on need." Their apologies were meaningful, but I realized that the damage to our family relationships was more extensive than any of us had initially understood. Madison's campaign had exposed fault lines and resentments that couldn't be easily repaired through legal documentation or good intentions. Over the following weeks, Tyler and Madison did find their own apartment, finally achieving the independence they claimed to want. The transition was accomplished with minimal communication between Tyler and me, our relationship having been fundamentally altered by the conflict over my room. The most painful aspect of the entire situation was the realization that Tyler's transformation hadn't been entirely due to Madison's influence. The legal documents had revealed that his resentment of my living situation and his sense of entitlement to my space reflected deeper insecurities and competitive feelings that had probably existed for years. Madison's presence had simply provided a catalyst and a justification for Tyler to express feelings he might have otherwise kept hidden. Her manipulation had been effective precisely because it had tapped into pre-existing resentments and jealousies within our family dynamic. Several months later, I learned through mutual friends that Tyler and Madison's relationship had ended badly. Without the external conflict over my room to unite them, their fundamental incompatibilities had become apparent. Madison's materialistic values and manipulative behavior had eventually turned toward other targets, creating conflicts that Tyler couldn't ignore or rationalize. Tyler reached out to me shortly after their breakup, offering an apology that was genuine but limited. He acknowledged that Madison had influenced his thinking and that their occupation of my room had been wrong, but he struggled to take full responsibility for his role in the campaign against my boundaries. "I got caught up in Madison's way of seeing things," he admitted during an awkward coffee meeting. "She made it seem like you were being unreasonable and selfish, and I believed her because I was frustrated with my own living situation." His apology was a start, but it revealed that Tyler still didn't fully understand the depth of his betrayal or the impact of his willingness to prioritize Madison's desires over my rights and boundaries. I accepted his apology because he was still my brother, but our relationship remained fundamentally changed. The easy trust and mutual support that had characterized our childhood connection was gone, replaced by a more cautious dynamic based on realistic expectations, rather than assumed loyalty. My parents and I worked to rebuild the family harmony that Madison's presence had disrupted, but we all understood that some changes were permanent. The experience had taught us important lessons about boundaries, independence, and the complex dynamics of family support and obligation. The room that my grandmother had created as a space for my artistic and professional growth had ultimately served an even more important purpose. It had become a symbol of the importance of maintaining personal boundaries and the strength required to defend them against family pressure and manipulation. As I continued to build my design business from my attic sanctuary, I kept the legal documents in their hidden compartment, not as weapons for future battles, but as reminders of my grandmother's wisdom and foresight. She had understood something about family dynamics and the challenges of independence that had taken me years to fully appreciate. The external staircase that wrapped around the old oak tree still provided me with the physical independence that Grandma Lily had envisioned, but more importantly, the entire experience had taught me about emotional and psychological independence. I had learned to defend my boundaries, not just through legal documents, but through the strength of my own convictions and self-respect. Standing in my restored sanctuary on quiet Sunday mornings, watching the light stream through the skylights onto my art supplies and computer equipment, I felt the presence of my grandmother's love and wisdom surrounding me. The room she had created had served its purpose perfectly, not just as a space for creative work, but as a foundation for the kind of independence that allows a person to remain true to themselves, even when family pressure demands compromise and sacrifice. The hidden documents had provided the legal authority I needed to end Madison and Tyler's campaign, but the real victory had been discovering my own voice and my own power. In defending my room, I had learned to defend myself, and that lesson was worth more than any amount of family peace purchased through self-betrayal. Madison had taught me that not everyone who claims to care about family actually understands what family love looks like. True family support means celebrating each other's achievements and respecting each other's boundaries, not demanding access to the fruits of success for personal convenience. Tyler had shown me that even the closest family relationships can be corrupted by outside influence and personal insecurity, and that maintaining those relationships sometimes requires accepting painful changes in their nature and depth. Most importantly, my grandmother had given me the tools not just to succeed independently, but to protect that independence when it was threatened. The legal documents hidden behind my bookshelf were just one part of her gift. The greater legacy was the understanding that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is against people you love. The room that had once been simply a beautiful space for my art and work had become something more valuable, a symbol of self-respect, independence, and the courage to maintain boundaries even under intense family pressure. Every morning when I climbed the external staircase to my sanctuary, I carried with me the knowledge that it was truly mine, earned through my grandmother's love and protected by my own strength. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.